Sarah and Ethan's love story felt like something from a movie, a whirlwind romance built on late-night talks, shared dreams, and an almost telepathic understanding of one another. They had met in a crowded city coffee shop, a chance encounter that quickly blossomed into an inseparable bond. He was a charming architect with ambitious plans, and she was a budding writer who saw poetry in his blueprints. Their life together was a canvas of bright, hopeful colors. The day they discovered Sarah was pregnant, the world seemed to stop and celebrate with them. Ethan held her, his eyes glistening with a future he painted in vivid detail. A small house with a yard, a room painted yellow for the baby, and a life filled with laughter. He promised her a partnership, a family built on the unshakable foundation of their love. Sarah believed him without a single shred of doubt, her heart full. Then, a subtle shift occurred, almost imperceptible at first. Ethan grew distant, his laughter less frequent, his nights filled with restless pacing. He dismissed her concerns with vague assurances about work stress, but a shadow had fallen over their once sunny life. The shared dreams he used to speak of were replaced by a quiet, brooding silence that Sarah couldn't penetrate, leaving her feeling increasingly isolated within the walls of their shared home, a silent observer to his inner turmoil. The monumental challenge arrived without warning. Sarah woke one cool autumn morning to an empty space beside her in bed. A single folded piece of paper sat on his pillow. The note was short, its words cold and devastatingly final. It spoke of being sorry, of not being the man she deserved, and of needing to leave. There was no other explanation, no destination, no promise of return, just an ending, abrupt and brutal, leaving her utterly alone. In the deafening silence of their apartment, Sarah clutched the note, the paper crinkling in her trembling hand. The man she loved, the father of her unborn child, had vanished from her life as if he were a dream. The future they had so carefully planned had just been erased, replaced by a terrifying unknown path she would now have to walk by herself. The weight of his absence was immediate and crushing, a promise shattered into a million pieces. The first few weeks were a blur of denial and desperate hope. Sarah called his phone hundreds of times, each call going straight to voicemail until the line was eventually disconnected. She contacted his friends, who were as clueless as she was, and even visited his old office, only to be told he had resigned without notice. Every closed door, every unanswered question was another layer of confirmation that he was truly gone, leaving her to face the world alone. The financial strain quickly became a suffocating reality. Without Ethan's income, she could no longer afford the rent on their apartment, a place filled with too many ghosts and broken promises. Packing up their life together was an excruciating process, each object a painful reminder of what she had lost. She moved into a tiny one-bedroom apartment on the other side of town, a place that felt more like a shelter than a home, its bare walls echoing her profound loneliness. The emotional toll was even more severe. Friends offered sympathy, but few could understand the unique agony of being abandoned while carrying a child. Nights were the worst, filled with a silence that amplified her fears about the future, about motherhood, and about her own ability to cope. The joy of her pregnancy was tainted with a deep, persistent sorrow, a grieving process for a life that had been stolen from her before it had even begun. The day her son, Leo, was born was a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. As she held him for the first time, his tiny fingers wrapping around hers, she felt an overwhelming surge of love that was pure and absolute. Yet, as she looked at his perfect face, she saw traces of Ethan, and a wave of grief washed over her. This moment, which should have been one of shared joy, was hers to experience in solitude, a beautiful but heartbreakingly lonely milestone. At her lowest point, sitting in the dimly lit hospital room with a sleeping Leo in her arms, the full weight of her situation crashed down. She was a mother, completely responsible for this fragile new life, but she felt like a child herself, lost and terrified. The path ahead seemed like an insurmountable mountain, and she felt utterly unequipped to climb it, her spirit eroded by months of uncertainty and heartache, leaving her feeling broken and completely overwhelmed. It was in that moment of despair, looking down at her son's sleeping face, that something shifted inside Sarah. As Leo stirred, his small, innocent eyes opened and met hers. In their depths, she saw not a reflection of her pain or a reminder of her loss, but a pure, unwritten future. He was not a symbol of what was gone. He was a reason to fight for what was to come. He was her anchor in a raging storm. The smallest moments became her lifeline. Leo's first gummy smile, the sound of his soft coos, the way his tiny body felt against her chest, these were the sparks of light that pushed back the darkness. Each small milestone was a victory, a testament to their shared survival. She realized that her happiness was no longer a distant memory, but was present in these fleeting, precious interactions. Her world had shrunk to this one little person, and it was enough. This realization ignited a profound change. Sarah made a conscious decision to stop being a victim of her circumstances and to become the architect of her own future, a future for both her and her son. She stopped checking her phone for messages that would never come and packed away the last of Ethan's things. The energy she had spent on anger and grief was now redirected into a powerful, protective maternal drive, a force she never knew she possessed. She began to actively let go of the bitterness that had taken root in her heart. Holding on to hatred for Ethan was like drinking poison and expecting him to suffer. It only hurt her and cast a shadow over her time with Leo. For her son's sake, she needed to heal. She chose to focus on the love that was right in front of her, a love that was unconditional and real, rather than mourning a love that had proven to be a mirage. The spark of hope, first ignited by her newborn son's gaze, had now solidified into a quiet, unshakable resolve. She was no longer just surviving each day. She was planning, dreaming, and building again. The path ahead was still daunting, but she no longer felt lost. With Leo as her compass, she was ready to take the first difficult steps toward creating a life of stability and joy, a life they both deserved. With her new resolve, Sarah began taking practical, deliberate steps to secure their future. She knew that relying on a single low-wage job wouldn't be enough. She started waitressing during the day, where she could interact with people and earn quick tips, and took on an office cleaning job in the evenings. The hours were grueling and the work was physically exhausting, but every dollar earned was a brick in the new foundation she was building for her family. Sleep became a luxury she could rarely afford. After putting Leo to bed and returning from her cleaning job, Sarah would open her laptop. She had enrolled in online courses for graphic design, a creative passion she had long set aside. The quiet hours between midnight and dawn became her classroom, a time when she invested in herself, fueled by caffeine and an unwavering determination to create a better life than the one she was currently living. She was not entirely alone on this arduous journey. An elderly neighbor, a kind widow named Mrs. Gable, grew fond of Leo and offered to watch him for a few hours in the evening, a small act of kindness that made a world of difference. Her own mother, who lived a state away, would call every night, her voice a source of comfort and encouragement that helped Sarah push through the moments of doubt and sheer exhaustion that threatened to overwhelm her. The daily routine was a relentless cycle of work, childcare, and study. There were days she felt she was running on empty. Her body and mind pushed to their absolute limits. She missed milestones, like seeing Leo crawl for the first time because she was at work. These sacrifices were a constant, painful ache in her heart, but the image of a stable future for her son was the motivation that kept her going, one difficult day at a time. Yet, with each challenge she overcame, her confidence grew. aching a difficult exam, paying the rent on time without help, or being able to afford a new toy for Leo. These were not small victories. They were monumental triumphs. They were tangible proof that she was not just coping, but succeeding. Sarah was no longer just a single mother. She was a provider, a student, and a survivor, forging a new path with her own two hands. 5 years passed, each one a testament to Sarah's incredible resilience. The sleepless nights and double shifts had paid off. She had earned her degree in graphic design and landed a stable, well-paying job at a marketing firm. The tiny, bare-walled apartment was now a memory, replaced by a cozy 2-bedroom rental in a safe neighborhood with a small park just down the street. It was a haven she had built from scratch. Their life had settled into a comfortable, happy rhythm. Mornings were a sweet chaos of breakfast and getting ready for school and work. Evenings were for homework, drawing at the kitchen table and reading stories before bed. Weekends were their sacred time, reserved for trips to the park, visits to the library, or simply building elaborate forts out of blankets in the living room. They were a team, a complete and loving family of 2. Leo was a bright, curious, and remarkably happy 5-year-old. He was the center of Sarah's universe, and he knew it. He had a mother who was always there, a constant source of love, support, and encouragement. He had no memory of a father, no sense of a missing piece in his life, because Sarah had filled their world with so much warmth and joy that there was no room for a void to form. The transformation in Sarah was profound. The heartbroken, terrified young woman she had once been was gone. In her place stood a confident, independent woman who was proud of her accomplishments and the life she had created. She had friends, a career she enjoyed, and a deep sense of peace. The scars of Ethan's abandonment had faded, no longer a source of pain, but a quiet reminder of the strength she never knew she had. She had finally reached a place of true contentment, believing that the most turbulent chapter of her life was firmly in the past. The memory of Ethan was like a character from a book she had read long ago, distant and disconnected from her current reality. She was happy, Leo was thriving, and their future looked bright and secure. She believed with all her heart that nothing could disrupt the beautiful peace she had fought so hard to achieve. It was a Tuesday evening just like any other. The comforting aroma of spaghetti sauce filled their small apartment as Leo sat at the kitchen table, diligently coloring in a picture of a dinosaur while Sarah prepared dinner. The television hummed quietly in the background, a familiar soundtrack to their peaceful domestic life. In these simple, ordinary moments, Sarah felt the deepest sense of gratitude for the stability she had worked so tirelessly to create for her son. Then came a knock on the door. It was firm and unexpected. They weren't expecting any visitors, and package deliveries usually happen during the day. A flicker of annoyance crossed Sarah's face as she wiped her hands on a towel and walked to the door, assuming it was a salesperson. She peered through the peephole, and her heart stopped cold. The world around her seemed to slow down, the familiar sounds of her home fading into a dull roar. Standing on her doorstep was a face she had replayed in her nightmares and her daydreams for years, a face she never, ever expected to see again. It was Ethan. He was older, the lines on his face deeper, his hair showing hints of grey at the temples. He looked tired, worn down by a life she couldn't imagine, but it was unmistakably him. The spoon she was holding clattered to the floor as she stood frozen in disbelief. A tidal wave of conflicting emotions crashed over her in an instant. The raw, searing anger she had buried for years surged to the surface, hot and potent. It was followed by a disorienting wave of confusion and a deep, familiar ache of a wound that had never truly healed. She had built a fortress around her heart to protect herself from this very man, and now he was standing right at the gate, threatening to tear it all down. He spoke her name, his voice raspy and hesitant, and the sound of it was a key unlocking a room in her memory she had sealed shut long ago. In that single word was the weight of 5 lost years, of unanswered questions, and of a story she had no idea she was about to hear. His presence on her doorstep wasn't just a return. It was an earthquake, poised to shatter the peaceful world she had so carefully constructed. After a long, tense moment, Sarah unlatched the chain and opened the door, her movements stiff and robotic. She didn't invite him in so much as step aside, an unspoken demand for the explanation she was owed. Ethan entered the apartment slowly, his eyes taking in the home she had made, a life he had no part in. From the kitchen table, Leo watched the stranger with wide, curious eyes, sensing the sudden, heavy shift in the atmosphere. "You have 5 minutes to tell me why you're here," Sarah said, her voice trembling with a mixture of anger and control. She crossed her arms, a physical barrier against him, and the pain his presence resurrected. Ethan flinched at her tone, but nodded, his gaze finally settling on her. He began to speak, his words tumbling out in a rush, as if he had been rehearsing this moment for years, fearing he would never get the chance to say them. His story was not one of malice, but of a desperate, misguided choice. The day before he left, he received a call that his father had suffered a massive stroke. He rushed back to his small, impoverished hometown to find his family on the brink of collapse, deeply in debt to dangerous loan sharks who were threatening them. He saw no way to untangle Sarah and their unborn child from the violent mess without disappearing completely, cutting all ties to protect them. He explained the agonizing years that followed. He worked multiple manual labor jobs to pay off the debts, all while caring for his now disabled father and his frail mother. He lived a life of penance, constantly watching over his shoulder, believing that his absence was the greatest gift he could give Sarah and his child. He told her he only returned now because his father had recently passed away, the last of the debts were finally settled, and his mother was safe. Sarah listened in stunned silence, the entire narrative of her past 5 years shifting on its axis. The story didn't excuse the pain, the loneliness, or the struggle he had put her through, but it did replace the image of a cruel, careless man with one of a desperate son making an impossible choice. The truth did not offer absolution, but it did introduce a devastatingly complex layer of sacrifice, turning her clear-cut anger into a murky sea of conflicting emotions. In the quiet that followed Ethan's confession, Sarah looked over at Leo, who was still watching them, his crayon paused mid-air. She realized her final decision had nothing to do with her and Ethan or the ghost of their past relationship. It was about her son. Leo deserved to know his father, not as a villain in a story she might one day tell, but as a real person, a man who had made a difficult choice, however flawed. She made a decision that surprised even herself. She offered not a second chance at romance, but a chance for him to be a father. They agreed to start with slow, tentative steps, supervised visits at the park, short afternoon outings, and honest conversations. It was an arrangement built not on rekindling love, but on the shared goal of doing what was best for their son, allowing him to form his own bond with the father he never knew he had. Sarah's transformation was now complete. She understood that her true strength wasn't just in her ability to survive on her own, but in her capacity for empathy and forgiveness. She had built a secure life for Leo, and she was strong enough to let someone else in without fearing it would fall apart. She was rewriting their family's story, not with a fairy tale ending, but with a realistic, compassionate, and hopeful new chapter that prioritized healing over resentment. This story shows that the human heart can endure the deepest wounds and still find a way to heal. Life rarely follows a script, and true strength is found in our ability to adapt, forgive, and rewrite our own endings when faced with the unexpected. What would you have done in Sarah's position? The path of forgiveness is often more difficult than the path of anger, but it can lead to a peace that anger can never provide. Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you were moved by Sarah's journey of resilience and forgiveness, subscribe to our channel and hit the like button for more stories that celebrate the incredible power of the human spirit. Your engagement helps us continue to bring these powerful narratives of hope and transformation to light, reminding us all of the strength we carry within ourselves.